the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, covering, of course, the Arizona Cardinals, with my co-host, as is usually the case, especially on a Tuesday night when we're recording, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Good times, Seth. We are officially 1 week away from final cuts, and it's about to happen.
Yeah, we're almost there, and we had some clarification cuts already, but outside of that, it's been kind of held close to the vest. I think we're starting to get an idea of some position groups, where others is still kind of a complete unknown. And I think, when you're going into a season that doesn't look ultimately promising in terms of wins and losses, which, most of us expected even coming into the season, you and I were on the positive side thinking 5, maybe 6 wins, and that's being very positive. You manufacture, you allow things like this, right? Like, the unknown. How is this team going to be built in year one of the Monty and Gannon era? And to me, it's been kind of fun to watch how they've gone about it, because, you talked a little bit about it last week. There are the key guys, and then there's everybody else. And it's not that they've made it like, oh, these guys are more important, or, this or that, but like, there are the guys that they're like, we have to have you for the regular season, or what could be a long season is going to be a lost season.
Yeah. And while we saw hopes and glimmers of positives in the first preseason game, there wasn't a lot of that against the Chiefs, as they got jackhammered into the ground, dismantled, call it what you want, but it was a 38-10 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, where they were not very competitive at all. And my one of my favorite things was to see Blaine Gabbert for 2 drives just absolutely carve up the Cardinals defense, and to be able to turn to my fellow online credentialed people, Tyler Drake over at Arizona Sports and Donnie Druid over at Sports Illustrated, and telling them, this reminds me of the summer of Blaine Gabbert in 2017 with the Cardinals. We were like, and we're like, Blaine Gabbert should be carving up players, could carving up defenses like this. He's a former first-round pick. He's as talented as you get as in terms of quarterback skill. He's been in the league for a decade. He totally carved up that third-team defense. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it was ugly. And it was one of the things I wrote about, and I know we'll talk about it, but the reality becomes that the talent at the top end, or their ability to play well within the system, hasn't looked too bad. I know we'll talk about that, but the depth, the difference in the depth of a championship contending team and a team that could be competing for the first overall pick is vast. And to be fair, that's what makes the difference in the NFL. Obviously, having elite players like Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce is huge, but having guys that can win games, if those two are, down in any way, shape, or form, is such a big deal. And that's the reality of the differences, because you've got the Cardinals, who are just trying to find guys to make it in the NFL, versus the Chiefs going, is this guy good enough to, be fitted for a Super Bowl ring at the end of this season? Like, that's just kind of where the two teams are right now.
Yeah. So what we want to talk about in this show is basically the good, the bad, There was one position battle, probably like we were paying attention to. I don't know how many other people were paying attention to it that's been decided. And the Cardinals have made a few roster moves. We'll kind of discuss what they mean specifically because they aren't necessarily significant. So let's get started. So 38-10 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. It was pretty bad. It was as bad as it sounded. They allowed 504 yards of offense. The Chiefs quarterbacks combined for 31 of 38 passing for 393 yards and 3 touchdowns. The defense did not get a takeaway. They did not sack the quarterback. And they basically moved up and down the field as they wanted. But we don't want to deal on what went wrong, and we don't necessarily talk about like as a team. What was good. That's what we want to focus right now. What was good collectively, and what was good individually. I can point to one thing that was good collectively, and it is honestly just a small sample size, but between the 2 weeks when the Cardinals' starting defense was in the game, they've been effective. They started all their starters, and so you had Budda Baker in there, you had Kaiser White in there, you had the whole lineup in, and in 2 drives, they held the Chiefs to 17 yards. Granted, there was an explosive play that got called back by a penalty. Nonetheless, it was a penalty.
I mean, penalties happen.
They do, and so the Cardinals left like. They had 2 drives where it was the starting defense against their starting offense, and they forced the Chiefs both times off the field after just a few yards. And once Budda Baker and Kaiser White came out and Stephen Collins came out, that's when Patrick Mahomes started just being surgical. But I think, like, if this defense, now I don't know what it's going to look like over a course of a whole game, but because you've got fatigue, but if that defense can, small sample size, 4 drives, but if in the regular season they can hang with basically any offense early in games, it'll make these games feel interesting at least.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it, right? Interesting, because you look at what they did, and I'm pulling it up right now just so we have, hard facts on our side, so to speak. And Budda, Kaiser, they played 10 snaps. Lecky, Gardeck. Lecky played 11. Gardeck played 13. Collier played 15. Wilson and Collins played 17. Jalen Thompson played the most from us, like a true starter, at 20, outside of Isaiah Simmons, and then Josh Woods and Keitrell Clark, who are kind of in positional battles, right? Like,
yeah.
Simmons, they asked him to do a lot last game. We'll get to his performance. But, outside of that, when you look at Jalen Thompson, 20 snaps, and then everybody else less than 20. And like you said, like, they were competitive. And that's something we talked about last week, right? Be competitive, compete with good teams. They did that against the Broncos. They did that against the Chiefs. I don't think you can expect a lot more because, like I said, the drop-off, and obviously the Broncos aren't a very good team right now either. But the drop-off from, Budda, Kaiser, Zaven, those guys to the next group is just so steep right now, which is slightly disappointing, right? I mean, that's kind of slightly disappointing. But at the end of the day, there were some key guys that were missing. And when you look at it, you didn't have either of Cam Thomas or BJ Aguilera in there still.
And MyJ either.
Yeah, and MyJ. So you're basically down your number 2 starting edge guy or
It became
was-
Jesse Luketa and Victor Dimukeje became the next
Right.
two guys in the game.
And Luketa was okay, and Dimukeje took a huge step back this week. You know, what it's ironic, maybe ironic's not the right word. It's interesting that Rashard Lawrence is now not a good player all of a sudden after looking like a guy that was like, oh, if he could just stay healthy under Vance, and now he's in that, I don't want to say doghouse, that makes it sound too strong, but he's a guy at the back end of the roster now, right?
Yeah.
And so like those guys getting so many reps and not competing, and that's just what it was. I mean, it just changes how things go, and we know that there's going to be question marks that have to be answered about the coverage situation outside of Marco Wilson, who played well. But after him, is it going to be Keitrell Clark? And they gave Keitrell a ton of work this week against the best passing offense in the NFL. I mean, it's hands down, no question. And, I think that's what you do in these situations. That's how you look at preseason. And like you said, for those 17 snaps, and we'll just call it 17, they looked competitive. They weren't good. I mean, nobody's shutting down the Chiefs offense, right? Like nobody, but they were competitive. And that to me is what I'm looking at. And then I obviously from there was much disappointment in the way of the guys that have opportunities to make a name for themselves that didn't take that this week.
Yeah. But let's talk about the good individuals. You mentioned Marco looking good in coverage early in the game, even making a nice. They even had a really nice pass breakup in there. For me, and I think he probably cemented his spot in the starting lineup. Wouldn't you say that Josh Woods just kind of crushed it?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Isn't it really crazy that Kaiser White, Chris Barnes, and Josh Woods all played well, and none of these guys are like high draft picks? It does make it interesting to ask. I mean, because even Soleil played pretty well, but it does make the question. And we've talked about this with White and who was the other guy there? I can't remember off the top. Mike Edwards, I think it was, or
in Philly, TJ.
In Philly, yeah, TJ Edwards. Thank you. How good they were, right? And neither of them were high draft picks. And you're like, oh, you know what Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis are really good at? Getting linebackers into position to make plays. And you're seeing that with what we've seen from Woods. I mean, Kaiser only played 10 snaps, but he looked.
Oh my goodness! Like he was not like the dog, like he wasn't the guy in Philly. He's carrying himself like the Jordan Hicks of this defense, right?
Right.
Physical, imposing, but honest. Like Josh Woods made a bunch of plays. He's hitting guys, and because of the type of player he's been in his career. Like think Antonio Hamilton last year in camp, been basically a special teams back of the roster guy. Josh Woods has been a special teams guy, just special teams ace for his career. And I wondered if it was just like, because he was on a podcast with PHNX, their Cardinals podcast, months ago, and he talked about how he was hoping to be able to bust the door down and become a defensive player. I mean, that's a normal thing to say. But he's giving me Lorenzo Alexander vibes, the way he's taking advantage of this. He's looked legitimately, Alexander played a different position, was more of a pass rusher, and really developed into an impact player as his career advanced. But it felt like, and I thought that Chris Barnes would probably be the guy to win that starting job. And Chris Barnes didn't play badly. But Woods was noticeably impactful with the starters, and then he popped even more when you had the second teamers on the field. His hustle, and when Rasheed White got past guys and was making a big play. Rice was really, really, really fortunate because Woods came from behind, punched the football out, like got his hand on the football, and it came loose, and it just fell right back into his hands. But that was one of those don't give up plays that was awesome to see. And I think when you get if he gets significant playing time this year, you're going to see a lot of that.
Well, and that's just it. Again, when they signed him, you and I talked quite a bit about how obviously he's a little bit behind the TJ Edwards track, but it would be kind of similar, right? Like Edwards played 11% of snaps his rookie year on defense, but was like in the 70s in special teams. And then he played a lot more in 2020, but it really took until Gannon and company got there, and then he became the guy and really took off. And he's not an all pro or Pro Bowl guy or anything like that, but he got paid what by Chicago? Like he got like $14 million a year or something, didn't he? Something crazy like that.
I actually thought it was a little bit. I thought it was less than expected. I think it was around $7 million. But even still.
Yeah, and so you just look at it, and that's just what this defense can do. And I think Woods is the guy that's kind of pouncing on that. We also saw that, again, Budda Baker's, I think, going to thrive in this defense. He played, again, 10 snaps, 9 in coverage, but he played really well.
It was a really friendly contract. It's good for him, but 3 years, almost $20 million.
Yeah. And then Kaiser, like you said, like he's just, and it's tough against this team. I mean, you look at it, like it's crazy to look at the numbers. Like Budda and Kaiser played 10 snaps. They played 9 in coverage because it's Kansas City, right? I mean, Jalen Thompson played 20 snaps. So he played double. He played 17 in coverage. He only had 3 against the run. So like they were basically like, when those guys are in, those are the guys that can make plays downhill. Like we're going to try to get plays over them. Because I mean, even Woods only saw in 32 snaps, only saw 6 rushing attempts. Like that's just, it's a hard team to gear up for. And when your pass rush is probably your weakest point, it's going to look even worse, right?
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And then I think offensively, there were a couple guys that I think we can shout out. I thought both Hernandez and Froholt looked good. Kind of the complete opposite of what Kansas City does, kind of balanced. They only played 15 snaps, kind of balanced, right? But they're just showing that they're really, really good in run blocking.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be able to run block. Josh Jones continues to play well. Something to watch, right? Because, and he played 53 snaps. He played a ton of snaps. It's going to be something to watch. Like, is that a move you make, especially with Monty Ossenfort stacking draft picks? Is that a move you'd be willing to make with how well he's playing? Like, can you take that chance, especially with DJ Humphrey's injury history, right? But again, limited action, but I thought the starting offensive line was fine. And I thought, as a whole, that was okay. And that's kind of what you're, again, looking for against, yes, they're missing Chris Jones, but that's on Chris Jones. It's not like they held him out for any reason, right? If their starters were there, they were going to play, so, I mean, that could be a situation where the first 8 games, the Chiefs are missing Chris Jones. So, it's just one of those things to watch. But, Hernandez is a guy we both want to see play well and maybe get extended, to more of a long-term deal. But, man, Froholt, and it's been 2 preseason games and 25 snaps, but they've been encouraging. I think that's the best way to put it.
Well, yeah, and that's because we're really, like, they were talking the way they're talking. They want to build this offensive line, protect Kyler Murray, and then they're bringing Yelda Froholt and to be the center. You're like, really? 4 NFL, and he's been good. He's been pretty solid. He hasn't been a problem, and I think there's something to be said as well as where he is within the locker room and with the coaching staff, since he was the guy that was sent out to do the coin toss as the single captain for the Cardinals on Saturday. I don't know what that meant. That you have to figure that there is something there to that. And like we said last week, this, like, one of their first moves in free agency might have been kind of like the steal of the offseason. Oh, funny note, Pat Elflein, the guy who's like a legitimate NFL center, but injuries have been the problem. What happened? He's hurt. He's hurt again already.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about Elflein and, like, could you trust him for that long? The obvious answer is no, and that's unfortunate. It's just, I mean, it's tough. Like, we're not trying to crap on a guy. We're not trying to take, shots at a guy, but the reality is
it stinks. It stinks for these guys who are talented players that can't stay healthy. That's rough.
Yeah, and then I think we should mention too, James Conner only a couple plays, but looked noticeably quicker.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that the running game looks so much better against Kansas City than Denver, because they had James Conner. And it wasn't just James Conner. Keontae Ingram looked really good too.
And there again, we're not there, and even the stuff we are there for, we're not allowed to talk about. And then even then, they kind of tend to sometimes wait until we're not there to show some stuff. And I'm going to tell you, like, everybody I've talked to is very excited about Keontae Ingram. So I don't know if they're bubble wrapping him. I don't know if this has been planned. I don't, obviously this is a first year regime and all of that, but they seem genuinely excited about Ingram, and it was easy to see why on Saturday.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting is, like, if there's one thing I've been able to take away from what they've done offensively, is that at least when Colt McCoy is going to be playing, we are going to see a lot of the tight end and the running back, even in the passing game.
Yeah, short stuff, get it out quick, get rid of the ball, let playmakers make plays, and that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and so, like, assuming that they both can be healthy, that a duo of James Conner and Keontae Ingram might not. I mean, that's not bad, and you know what? If the Cardinals can be consistent moving the ball, you know what? Both of those guys are big. They are going to wear down opponents. Connor's a big physical runner. Keontae, he's not as physical a runner, like run over you, run through you, but he's a big dude as well.
Yeah, and he's a fun guy to watch run, like a real fun guy, and that's, for me, this is going to be kind of a boring offense until Kyler gets back. They're going to put a lot on their defense, for better or worse. But it's good to see that they look like they can run the ball a little bit, and they can play a little defense. And I know the end score did not show that, but I thought the starters showed that, that's a game. And I know people are going to be like, well, that's not good. That's a game that the Cardinals probably lose like 24-14 or 24-10, right? And if Kyler's in there, maybe it's, 24-17 or something like that. But, and you might be saying, well, that's not good. But, I mean, that's literally the best team in the NFL. And, like, if that's what you're able to do and where you're at, obviously health and things like that all matter. But, like, that's an encouraging thing for a team that's in, what is kind of a total rebuild.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the Star of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about the not so good. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. I think, well, and aside from, and we'll kind of talk about that, Nolan Cooney, the punter, wow. But we'll save that for the next part of that, because that, spoiler alert, the Cardinals have a new punter. But there were a lot of things that were a little bit disappointing in that game. I mean, aside from like the team performance, players that showed promise, they just didn't do much. And I'm not saying that they're going to be bad or they took a step back, but all the praise that we've seen from Michael Wilson didn't do anything, and actually had a negative because he had the holding penalty. You saw a little bit in run blocking, but he picked up a penalty. He didn't get a target, I don't think, but he wasn't impactful. There was a lot of guys who had looked solid against Denver who just felt like they were basically non-contributors. They were just there. Nothing happened with them.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations when you look at it that this is a the Wilson situation. In his 14 snaps, yeah, he didn't look good. But you also have to be realistic in the sense that this is an offense that you need to be able to block well. He typically does that. And then when you get pass plays, you only may get 2 a game. So like, it's not going to be a volume offense, right? Where like we see with KC or Cincy or even Buffalo, where they might get, 12 targets a game. Like, especially early, it might be where you run, if they run 60 plays, you might run only 35 routes. And if, you may only get 3 targets on those 35 routes, like it's just one of those situations. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. He did not look like we had hoped. But I also think that at the time, like, some of the time we overestimate or, we expect it.
I tried pumping the brakes on all off season on Michael Wilson.
But I am also not just talking you and I, but like, because especially now, it's one of the things I've really found, now that everybody's kind of at camp, right? And everybody's talking about camp. The what's the word I'm looking for? Like the hype is kind of out of control, and I'm not saying us or anybody specific, but like we just see all the time. It's like we see these one-on-one highlights of Michael Wilson winning a rep, and it's like, oh, he's going to be a dog. Oh, he's going to do this or that or the other. And it's like, all right, I mean, he might, and he looks really good, but like also,
and I think there's something to be said about the fact that it looks like he is he's wide receiver 2 basically right now is what it looked like, because it was Hollywood and Wilson, and then they added Rondale in the slot. Pascal also came in some, but basically Wilson is one of their top 2 guys, which is I don't know how I don't know if I'm a little, well, that's not great.
Yeah,
great.
Right, that's a fair question, right? Like, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And those are things we'll see, and see how they go. But right now, I think overall, you've seen that this is a work in progress more than anything, right? Like, it's definitely a work in progress. And to your point, like Trey McBride didn't look great. Offensively, we're just going over the offensive guys right now. Trey McBride didn't look great. The backup interior guys didn't look great. You look at the quarterbacks. I mean, didn't exactly look great, right? Like, you've got the real highs and lows of the rookie and Clayton Tune, but then you've got the really boring, I guess is the best way to put it, performance of Colt McCoy thus far, right? Like it hasn't been bad by any means, but it's kind of just been there. Like,
right. And I'm not saying that he's in any danger of losing the starting job while Kyler's out to Clayton Tune, because I think that's a bad idea. Because I think the variance in Tune's play would be too risky.
Too great.
Yeah, too great right now. And while Colt, we're going to say, but yeah, it's and maybe it's simply because he hasn't had time to get into rhythm. There has been nothing. There really hasn't been a whole lot offensively like, yeah. But you'll be like, they're going to survive. I guess this is basically, it feels like that is treading water at best. It's even more so, because remember how they were trying to, handle DeAndre Hopkins being out? This is even more so, where they're just like, we just Colt, just keep us together. Don't mess up. Like literally game managing.
Yeah,
on a bad team.
I think that's what their goal is, and we'll see how it works out for them. But, it's going to be interesting because it's been, like I said, it's just been very, very boring thus far. And so we'll see, what the expectation and what the growth of that looks like over the next couple weeks, but the offense, I don't think you and I have very high expectations for the offense until Kyler gets back. Like,
Correct.
that's not being rude. That's just looking at, we know what we have in Colt McCoy. We've seen it for the last several years. And a 5th round rookie, like for every Brock Purdy, there's 27.
And I'm going to keep saying about Brock Purdy, if he were dropped into any other team, any other system, nope.
Right.
He was like, what made Brock Purdy so successful is the fact that he had just enough physical talent and was not making mistakes. And so we can't expect that from an offense where the receivers aren't consistently 3 yards separated from their defenders like it seems like San Francisco's is. But can we talk about Isaiah Simmons? Because, yeah. And people are very down on Isaiah right now. And I don't know what to think. I will say this. The touchdown play when Shane Buechele ran for the touchdown, like Isaiah literally could have killed him. But chose not
he'd
to.
already got.
So I don't. Yeah, and he'd already gotten flagged. But I'm like, do we want to kill him for that? Because it's a preseason game. Like Simmons, like if he flies in there, I think Shane Buechele's head comes off.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of questions, and people, he's got a lot of trust and ability to earn back. Let's start there. Can we both agree with that? Like, nobody right now is really going to defend Isaiah Simmons. So any mistakes he makes or questionable things are going to get magnified. And a lot of people didn't like his hit was it against Rice? I don't remember who it was. But, the hit on the wide receiver there, thought it was dumb.
That's hard.
It just felt like
hard for a defender. And you know what? It's really hard. It's really hard for Simmons because of his size. And Vance Joseph talked about that. Is like one of the things that he's going to run into, like if he's going to be a hitter, because he's 6'4", 240 pounds, you can't hit it's just very hard for him to hit a guy in the right spot, especially smaller players. Buda's able to do it because he's already smaller. So he can easily aim for the thigh pad. That's it. He goes for the thigh pad. Simmons can't get that low. So if a guy is going down and he's going to make contact, like his shoulder pads are going to hit pretty much everybody's helmet. So that's really unfortunate for him. But yeah, it's a thing he has to adjust to.
Well, and as a coach, and this is, I mean, obviously I don't ever compare anything that I do with the NFL, but I don't know if this is true. I obviously never coached Isaiah Simmons, but Simmons seems like the type of guy that plays really well when things are going well. And once he makes a mistake, he tends to compound those mistakes by maybe, getting down on himself, maybe, like, I don't want to say he feels sorry for him, but like maybe playing a little more scared than he should. And all of that is something that I think, and we heard and we listened to Jonathan Gannon after the game talk about Isaiah Simmons. And, we always talked about how Cliff never threw a guy under the bus, right? Like it was always Cliff's fault. He didn't throw his coaches under the bus. He didn't throw anybody. Like it was always Cliff's fault. Gannon does a really good job of saying like, hey, he did this well, or he was doing this well, or this, and like praising him, knowing that there were several mistakes that can be cleaned up in that situation. And that's what I've been impressed with Gannon. It's not just his teaching, but how he deals with the negativity or the negative plays. And that's what we saw with Simmons. I would say is that, I think he handled it well. He did not do a great job in that game. He did not play as well as he did the first game, but I think overall that he's accepting the coaching, and it seems like Gannon has an idea of how to coach Simmons now.
And what Gannon said, it wasn't, and he said a couple of times in coverage he may have lost leverage, but we'll go back and flip it up. And there's one thing that we've seen about Simmons, like over the last couple of years, is that he can, like, that's one thing that happens against the Chiefs specifically last year. He got in trouble because he was playing bad technique and lost leverage several times to Kelsey last year. And I think that's just a common thing, is like he sometimes just gets a little outside of himself for what he's supposed to do. Maybe he's such a smart guy from what we saw at Clemson, and he's always been praised for how smart he is. But maybe it's he gets caught into the I can do this, so I can take a chance and then makes a mistake because of it. And it seems like that's where he is. Either he's just a step slow or step behind the decision, so where he loses leverage on a route, and he ends up getting, and it makes him look terrible. And that thing, his mistakes make him look bad. That's the problem.
Exactly.
With him.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And then but he wasn't the only bad one. So let's not act like he was. Christian Matthew, Keitrell Clark, both
Matthew
struggled.
Well, it's one thing to get beat. Like he was like, Gannon wants his corners to tackle. He did not do a good job at that.
Right. And so, you look at both Clark and Matthew, not great this weekend. That was disappointing. I thought that, again, Rashard Lawrence, man, I just don't know what's going on with him. Like, he was always consistent.
Yeah.
That's what you and I would always say. And now all of a sudden, it just looks bad. It just doesn't look good. So
it's very, maybe, you think rather than cutting him, maybe we could, send him to Denver and Vance Joseph for a 7th rounder.
Right. Just get something for him.
Because honestly, like, I think the last 2 weeks I've had him outside of the 53, because you look at the guys who are going to make the team. Collier, Lecky Fotu, like, and I mentioned this on the solo show last week. I'm like, look at him. He's quietly, and I think we talked about it too, like quietly become a starting nose tackle, which is what he was in college. Like, I wanted to talk to him after the game last week, and I should have. No one was over this. Like, I wanted to ask him if, has he been, like, is the focus been narrowed as opposed to what they was doing before? Because if you look at Philly, those interior guys are giant athletes. Lecky is that. And he has, like, I think the hope was that he could develop into something more. But if you just have him do what he's good at, which I think that's been again his thing, is like, especially guys that have been in the league a little bit, don't try to ask them to do more. Ask them to do what they can do well, and have them do it well, and have them prove later that they can add to that role, and that's a good way to go. But yeah, because right now, the guys that feel like locks for the roster on the defensive line are Collier, Fotu, Jonathan Ledbetter. Nice story, kind of, honestly. I kind of like that. Carlos Watkins, Kevin Strong. And then if they keep a sixth defensive lineman, which I think they will, then it's about, is it Richard? Is it Dante Stills, their draft pick? Is it Eric Banks? Is it Ben Stilley, who's made some plays? I mean, that last spot is really up for grabs.
Even Jacob Slade looked good. I mean, so yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, we went in kind of, I don't want to say assuming that Lawrence was,
well, like of the returners, like Fotu, Lawrence, and Ledbetter, we always felt that Lawrence was the better player.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. And like I said, it might just be one of those situations that he is just not a fit in what Gannon wants to do. And quite frankly, that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Anyone else of note that kind of stuck out as disappointing or not doing well? I mean, it was, for me, it was mostly just a bad overall performance. I didn't.
Yeah.
That
1000%.
It just was that, and it was once they got behind, then they couldn't catch up. It was honestly really disappointing because they had a chance to get that touchdown. They scored the touchdown, but had it called back off Caden Davis's crackback block, which I didn't see it, and from what people told me that it was a crappy call. Once they didn't get the touchdown, basically it was lights out because if they score that touchdown, you feel a little bit of juice and maybe can make it interesting. But the second half of that ball game was like a lot of preseason games, which is unwatchable.
That's a great way to put it, because it was there was a lot of going back to the UFC fights for certain people on this podcast.
All right, coming up next on the Rise Up C Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Hey, we've got a position battle locked up, and it's a bit of a surprise. That's coming next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. We have a winner of a position battle, and I'll say this. I am shocked. The Cardinals released Matt Hawk, a guy that's for the last 6 years never not been an NFL punter. It's not like he hasn't been to sit out at all. He was signed by a team. He's been their punter all year. And felt when he was signed in May, that was it. That we knew, Andy Lee's done. We're not bringing back Andy Lee. But guess what? It was we didn't know if it was really a position battle, but we knew at least they weren't just giving it lip service. There was a battle between him and Nolan Cooney. And guess what? Nolan Cooney, the punter that, has been, kind of just right there. Like, he was on the offseason roster last year. Basically, and the Cardinals always do this. They bring in, especially when you have old specialists, you'll bring in a younger specialist to lessen the load. But Cooney went out and won that job. And in 2 preseason games, I will say this, that his punting was fantastic. And he adds the fact that he held, he's now, that's 2 off seasons of holding field goals, so there's got to be a comfort level for Prater. And I don't know if he will replace Prater on kickoffs, but he gives the Cardinals another option for kickoffs, especially if there's any concern about his hip, Prater's hip, which was an issue. He missed 4 games with the hip injury and led to their kicking problems. And, and if he didn't have to do kickoffs, he probably would have been okay for a couple of those games.
Yeah, and so that's just, again, new regime. We don't know how they do things, but this was a bit of a shock. But Cooney's punted his butt off, all well in his preseason performance, and it was and during camp he's done well, and so to see him get the win from the performance isn't surprising, but just based on how coaches, especially defensive coaches, typically like to do things, it was a bit surprising. But again, I think it's good to see this kind of change. Instead of going with the expensive kind of veteran because it's the safer play, go with the guy that earned it. And I think it'll talk to the guys more, right? Like they'll be able to say like, oh, this is a guy that or these are coaches that will 100% give it to the guy that works the hardest, that puts the performance out on the field. And it's not just about what your name is or what you've done in the NFL already.
Yeah. And Jeff Rodgers, this is one of those cool things where that Rodgers has a lot of pull in the type of special teams guys that he gets. Cooney was a guy that Rodgers probably scouted, decided he wanted him on the team as a possibility for Andy Lee, or at least a guy to develop, and to have him then develop, that's kind of cool. That honestly is one of the cooler things to see, especially considering Cooney's background, the fact that he picked up punting when he was covering for cancer and all that, but like his numbers are eye popping. Not like he had that 65-yard punt on the fly. In 5 punts in the preseason, he's averaged over 50 yards. Over 47 in net, and 3 of his 5 punts have been inside the 20. Those, like, you can't do much better than that. And honestly, Hawk wasn't bad. He wasn't. He's a pretty good NFL punter. He's not a great NFL punter. He's a pretty good NFL punter, and he's probably going to land somewhere real quick. But Cooney flat out won that job.
Well, and it'll be one of those situations that ends up being he ends up being at, getting signed after the preseason's over, or he gets signed when the first veteran gets injured, or the first time a guy ends up not punting well in a game and they're like, bring in a veteran, I'm not dealing with this, kind of like the Cardinals did with that long snapper that one year in the Bruce Arians era, right?
Who actually turned out to be a pretty good long snapper years
later.
Yeah,
Cameron Kennedy. Yeah,
he ended up, he's a Steelers guy right now.
Yeah, but that's exactly what happens. It's like, go get me a veteran. Like they have one bad game and they're like, nope, go get me one.
Can't do this. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see throughout, and if because of the consistency there, hopefully what we see now is Prater, that we don't have issues with Prater kicking because the holding is consistent. You can use Cooney on kickoffs, and apparently you can, because I felt kind of the one thing that we started to see from Andy Lee last year. He's had a big leg his whole entire career. He started every once in a while, like maybe once a game. Just you're like, ew, that was bad. He was a little less consistent, and he still hasn't picked up anywhere. But granted, he was ready to retire. But having Cooney, that's cool. That's cool on a lot of levels. I will say this from the local level, it's going to be disappointing for the McNamara family here in Gilbert, because they were hoping that Andy Lee would punt one more year so that Austin could get drafted by the Cardinals out of Texas Tech this next year. And so he could play for his home team. So, but that's a completely separate thing. It has nothing to do with this, other than I know the McNamara's and I know Austin, and I know his dad really was, like, his dream was that Austin could punt for the Cardinals, and it doesn't look like that'll probably happen. If Cooney's any good, they will bring him back for years to come.
Right.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about final roster moves that have been made. What do they mean before the preseason finale? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast with Cardinals Talk on the Web. The Cardinals have made a few roster moves, but I don't want you getting too crazy about them, because to me, the moves that were made are simply to get them through their preseason finale. What have we seen so far? They released Matt Hawk. Okay, we know that. They released waived injured Lachavious Simmons. He wasn't going to make the roster anyway. They re-signed running back Stevie Scott, and then they added on, and then that was announced on Tuesday, Zach McLeod, pass rusher from the Titans. Would you say either Stevie Scott or Zach McLeod have any future with the team beyond this week?
No, and we talked we talked about it earlier, but Cam Thomas, B.J. Ojulari, Myjai Sanders, all not playing in the game. Obviously, if they all can't go, if they all can't go the first week, then one of them's got to go on IR, right, or PUP or something, because they have to create a roster spot at that point.
Yeah. So the way I looked at it, preseason finale, you're not going to play Gardeck or Collins. Cam Thomas was hurt, so we don't know if he's going to be available. Myjai was hurt, don't know if he's going to be available. And then Ojulari, you don't know if he's available yet. So if you take out Collins and Gardeck, you are left with only Jesse Luketa, Victor DeMcCagey, David Anini to play outside. In fact, last week, at the end of the game, I don't know if he's practiced there, but they were using one of their interior guys, Eric Banks, to play edge towards the end of the game.
Right. So that's what this guy's being brought in for.
So I don't know if McLeod will play, but I think at least at minimum, because when Stevie Scott was signed before the Denver game, didn't play in the Denver game and then was released, I think he is there. It's an emergency policy, because if you could go into that game with four. You could go into that game with four guys, and maybe Ojulari plays this week. I would think maybe. I think he's moving in that direction.
I think you and I are both in the we hope.
And Myjai, I wonder if he's going to make the team personally. With this defense, I don't know, but hopefully Ojulari's back, and that gives him Ojulari, Luketa, DeMcCagey, and then Anini, who's been with the team for a few weeks. So and then you don't need McLeod, but I think that's the case. Now, Stevie Scott coming back, I think that's also, James Conner's not going to play.
Right.
And
I would guess Keontae's not going to play either.
That's my guess as well. And so
if you get an injury.
Well, and Tyson Williams was hurt, so he didn't play on Saturday. So if you keep Conner out, and then if you decide to keep Ingram out, you've got Corey Clement, you've got Amari DeMarcado, and so it's either they're not going to have play Keontae, or Ty Williams is out another week. Right. And so you just want to have a fourth running back available just in case to get him through the game in that preseason finale. So I'm not saying that Stevie Scott's going to play. I'm not saying that McLeod's going to play, but I think that those are simply insurance additions. They are not. They are the definition of a camp body emergency plan right now. I think just to make sure that they can get through the game. So that's my analysis of the roster moves. There might be more coming, but yeah. And
at this rate, there's not, though, and that's kind of where we're going for this. With, it's been already kind of what we expected, right? An up and down preseason. We're expecting the same thing. And during the season, but hopefully we see, more health and competence moving forward as this continues and as they get closer to as they go through the season this year.
All right. Anything else of note that we want to talk about?
No, I think it's exciting to see this. It's been good so far, and we'll see how it ends up. But thus far it's been, I think for the starters a positive, and the issues are what we expected. They're not very deep.
I will do a solo show later this week, and maybe what I can get from Seth. The one thing we have not done, because our next show is going to come after roster cuts. We'll react to the roster cuts. But maybe what I can have Seth do is to give me kind of the guys he thinks, instead of necessarily a whole 53-man roster prediction. I'll give you mine, and I'll give you what I'm expecting to see in the Vikings game. But I'll do a solo show Thursday or Friday, and then we'll be back next week to react to roster cuts. But yeah, so that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise of the Sea Red Podcast. This is episode 453. Thank you for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.